You're listening to The Unsafe Bible with Pastor Ken Brown.
When you get to things in the scriptures where sometimes it moves into the supernatural, sometimes commentaries just jump over it and go to the next verse. That's why we spent time going through the unseen realm, making sure we kind of have a view that the Bible is supernatural and that there is a supernatural world out there, and that there's a physical and there's also a supernatural world. The supernatural world is populated just as the physical world is populated. And just as in the physical world you have folks who love the Lord and folks who don't love the Lord, in the supernatural world you have the same thing.
As Christians, do we truly consider the spiritual world? We know that demons and angels exist, but do we realize how this spiritual world impacts our own life? Today, Pastor Ken explains that the spiritual realm is very real and can't be ignored. When you're going through a time of great difficulty and can't understand what's stopping you from moving on, it's a very real possibility that the spiritual realm is interacting with you. Don't be afraid, because nothing can happen to you when the Lord is by your side. Well, let's join Pastor Ken in the book of Daniel, chapter 2, as he begins his message, And Now for Something Completely Different.
Okay, we're in still Daniel. We're going to be in Daniel for a while. But we're going to be in Daniel 2, and we've been in Daniel 2 now for 2 weeks. And now we started talking about it last week when we got to verse 43. And basically, it's something totally different. Now for something completely different. It is. We're talking about the feet. Okay, remember, we've been talking about the statue. We've been working our way down. We've gone through all the different kingdoms, and now we're talking about the feet. And there's some intriguing language in the original language in verse 43, and we want to talk a little bit about that. One of the things that you need to remember is when you listen to me, it says in Acts 17:11, don't believe everything I say. Check it out in the Bible for yourself, okay? You might want to check out the Word and see for yourself, because it's some interesting ideas. There's this section of Scripture, you can have 3-4 different views on it. So we'll take a look at that. So what we're doing is we're looking at the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. Okay, remember, he was contemplating the future of his kingdom, and he had a dream. The Lord showed this Gentile the future of the world from his day to beyond where we are right now in time. Yahweh went beyond the king's kingdom, gave him a detailed account of the future, and showed him events that even that Jesus speaks about taking place during the tribulation. And that's what's in this dream. So when you start looking at the feet, you start seeing some of the tribulation showing up in those feet. And quite honestly, we said we don't understand all of what the feet mean until you get to Daniel chapter 7, you take a look at Revelation 13, and then you go, oh, I know what they are. But he saw a strange statue. And it clearly pointed to 4 future world kingdoms. Talking about the gold at the head, that was Nebuchadnezzar, and then there were several different other metals getting less valuable as you go down, and they were also getting lighter in weight. So this is a very top-heavy statue. But there's also a hint of a 5th kingdom, and there's a 5th kingdom that's referenced that's caused when this stone cut without hands strikes the statue on the feet. But again, when you take Daniel 7 and what he teaches there about the horns on these animals that he sees, and you look at Revelation 13, you understand that the feet, specifically the toes, or in Daniel 7, the horns, are speaking about 10 nations that will arise in the last days. Now, I don't know if it's 5 that are in what would be considered the Western Roman Empire and 5 in what would be considered the Eastern Roman Empire. Could be, because we talked about the fact that there were 2 legs, one signifying the east of the Roman Empire and one signifying the west of the Roman Empire. But Daniel provides some additional detail in verse 43. Let's take a look at those verses, starting in verse 40. Then there will be a 4th kingdom, as strong as iron. Now, we talked about that last week. It's the Roman Empire. Inasmuch as iron crushes and shatters all things, so like iron that breaks in pieces, it will crush and break all these in pieces. In that you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it'll be a divided kingdom, but it'll have in it the toughness of iron, inasmuch as you saw the iron mixed with the common clay. As the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly of pottery, so some of the kingdom will be strong, and part of it will be brittle. And in that you saw the iron mixed with common clay, They will combine with one another. All of a sudden you see these words changing. We're going to unpack that a little bit. They will combine with one another in the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, even as iron does not combine with pottery. In the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed, and that kingdom will not be left for another people. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, but it will itself endure forever. Inasmuch as you saw that a stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it crushed the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will take place in the future, so the dream is true and its interpretation is trustworthy. Now, that's the New American Standard version of that. I want to take a look at a couple other versions because some give us additional information on some of these words. They have some very interesting meanings in the original language. And this section of Scripture is not in Hebrew, it's in Aramaic. It's written from chapter 2, verse 4, and it's from that point forward, it's Aramaic. It's the language of Nebuchadnezzar. Again, remember, the first 4 chapters are a story about how Nebuchadnezzar goes from being a leading Gentile world king to a believer. And he actually writes one of the chapters. So verse 40, this is from the English Standard Version. This is a modern translation. The last was from the New American Standard, which was translated in the 70s. And it's more of a word for word. This is a good translation as well. And there shall be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things. And like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush all these things. And as you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay, partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom, but some of the firmness of iron shall be in it, just as you saw iron mixed with the soft clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. As you saw the iron mixed with soft clay, so they will mix one another in marriage. Now, that's a different phrase than what was used in the New American Standard, but we'll get to what it actually says. But they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of those kings, again, those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. By the way, that's never happened yet. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever, just as you saw that a stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold. A great God has made known to the king what shall be after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation sure. So we're looking at 2 modern translations that are taking in the evidence that we have from the Dead Sea Scrolls and all of that. But then there's the question of, well, what does it say in the Septuagint? Again, the Septuagint was translated around 250 BC. So this is what it says in the Septuagint, and you'll find that there's some additional things in this, and we'll see what the rabbis in 250 BC took these words to mean. And a fourth kingdom, mighty as iron, just as the iron overpowered everything, and as the iron destroyed every tree. The Roman Empire was significant in that when the legion showed up at your village and was going to attack it, they'd cut down all the surrounding trees and then put up a siege wall. They deforested huge areas of Europe, and it says so right here in the scriptures, albeit it was written in 500 BC before they even started doing any of it. So all the earth will be shaken, and as you watched its feet, a portion, partly of earthenware, and a portion partly of iron, another kingdom, made of 2 parts, will be in it. So we see here in the Septuagint, it's clear there's a 5th kingdom. And just as you saw the iron mixed up together with the clay of an earthen vessel. As for the toes of the feet, a certain portion was iron, and a certain portion was potter's clay. And a certain portion of the kingdom will be strong, and a certain portion will be broken. And as you saw the iron mixed up together with the clay of an earthen vessel, they will be commingled into the offspring of mankind, and they will not be commingled in harmony, nor will they be favorably inclined towards one another. This is what the rabbis said that meant. Totally a little bit different than what we saw before. Everybody's so struggling with the same words. Even just as the iron is not able to be mixed with the clay of an earthen vessel, and in the time of those kings, the God of heaven will make another kingdom stand that will last into the ages, and it will not be destroyed. And this kingdom, with respect to another people, will not be permitted, but it will smite and abolish these kingdoms. And this kingdom will stand firm forever. Whereas you saw a stone cut out of a mountain without hands, and it crushed to powder the earthen elements, the iron, the brass, the silver, the gold. So the great God has shown to the king the things that will happen during the last days. And accurate is the dream and reliable is the interpretation of this. And then it goes on. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king, falling forward to the ground, worshipped Daniel and ordered offerings and libations to be presented to him. And the king cried out to Daniel, saying, "Your God is certainly a God of gods and Lord of kings, one who alone discloses hidden mysteries, because you were able to clearly make known this mystery." Then King Nebuchadnezzar, when he had extolled Daniel and presented great many gifts, he established him over the administration of Babylon and appointed him as overseer and head of all the wise men of Babylon. Good gig when you're 19, okay? And Daniel entreated the king in order that they would set up over the administration of Babylon Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel was in the royal court. Again, now, when this is all happening, he's 19. And the king is about 25 to 27, somewhere in that area. Now, what are the feet? What are the toes? What's that all about? Now, there's numerous interpretations of this. The mixing of the iron and the clay could mean that in the Roman Empire, you had dictatorial and democratic practices. Now, there are a lot of commentators that wrote in the 19th century who said that this was all something that happened back during the Roman Empire. It's done. It's already all happened. Problem is, there's never been a kingdom that destroyed everything. That hasn't happened yet. So I have a problem with that. That's not an unusual view, but I think it ignores verse 43. By the way, most of the commentaries ignore verse 43. When you get to things in the scriptures where sometimes it moves into the supernatural, sometimes commentaries just jump over it and go to the next verse. That's why we spent time going through the unseen realm, making sure we kind of have a view that the Bible is supernatural and that there is a supernatural world out there, and that there's a physical and there's also a supernatural world. The supernatural world is populated just as the physical world is populated. And just as in the physical world you have folks who love the Lord and folks who don't love the Lord, in the supernatural world you have the same thing. You have divine beings who love the Lord and serve him, and then you have those who don't. And they serve and work with another guy whose name is Satan. So, but what they're, again, talking about this view, unity is impossible and the kingdom's vulnerable because it tries to unite elements which just don't come together. So that's why they're saying this is why this is happening. The firmness of the kingdom, represented by the iron, is emphasized, suggesting an enforced policy or dictatorship, and it may be connected with the policy mentioned in verse 43. They'll mix to one another in marriage, literally the seed of men, which is an unusual expression reminiscent of the prohibition to mix seed in the field. Men devise schemes, but they're unsuccessful. So this particular commentator starts getting to that point in verse 43, but then stops and just basically says, well, it's dictatorships and republics, and they just don't get together. The idea comes up, though, that there's something going on in verse 43, and they start talking about the words in there, but they don't quite go into it. So here's the thing. After imperial Rome had run its course, its territory and power went into various subdivisions. In the composition of this, something of the iron remained. This is another view. But in connection with the fragile elements of the baked clay, the forms and coherences of which were fluctuating and doubtful. History down to our time tells how this has been completely fulfilled. I don't agree, but this is another view. In this severed variable, partly strong and partly broken form, the Roman dominion, and it still continues under its codes, combined with the bitter intermixture of the will that governed all the nations are still living and will continue to live the very end of the present world. Joseph Seiss wrote that in 1879. Okay, it was a common view in the 1800s. It really was that it was in existence at that time. But that view has been picked up by others. But then you look at the toes, and some things make more sense, okay? His view was when, at the end of the age, the stone will strike and human sovereignty is over with. But he's saying that those 10 nations already exist. Well, it's not 10 nations. There's 111 nations right now, according to the United Nations. That may change tomorrow. I don't know. I can't keep up with it anymore. But that's not what is being talked about here. The familiar attempts in many commentaries to find a 10-toe stage of the image in the 5th and 6th centuries do not correspond to the facts of history. They don't. But I've literally read 50 commentaries on this section, and a lot of them say that's what happened, but it didn't. Because according to Daniel's prophecy, the 10-toe stage happens at one time. It's simultaneous. The kingdoms exist side by side, and they're all destroyed at one time by a catastrophic event, okay? That's not happened. That has not happened in history. It has not occurred. So we see views that try to explain that it's happened in the past, but when you start looking at it, you're going, no, not really. That hasn't happened. I like the explanation, but that hasn't happened. And you notice that all the explanations try to do away with the supernatural aspect. It tries to make it more natural rather than supernatural. And again, this is a supernatural book, so we have to take a look at it with a little different set of eyes and find out what's really going on here. So here we have a second kingdom, okay? We had the fourth kingdom, which was Rome, but we are talking about another kingdom, starting at the ankles. There's a problem in the English Standard Version. They mix with one another in marriage. If we looked at the International Standard Version, and the New American Standard also says the same, mix themselves with human offspring or marriage or something such as that. But the Septuagint says will be commingled into the offspring of mankind. And you start putting all of that together and you're going, what does that all mean? Now, let me go with this one evidence here again, because there have been a lot of people who say that stone shows that Christ, when he established the kingdom at his first coming, that he conquered all these kingdoms, and really? The kingdom is already, but not yet. We talked about that when we were studying the unseen realm. That's not really truly the case. There is no evidence 2,000 years after Christ that the kingdom of God has conquered the world. Do you see that anywhere? Is the United States a totally Christian nation? No, not hardly. Is the world conquered in serving the Lord? No. So that's a false premise. And a lot of people do like to use that, but it's not true. History will not reach its goal by means of the processes that are currently within it. It's not going to happen. It only reaches its goal by some supernatural action from outside of the earth, the stone cut without hands, that smashes these 10 kingdoms. That's the only thing that stops it. It's a supernatural action. The stone, I like the way Dr. Lennox puts it, the stone will fall. Sounds like he is at Oxford. Anyway, there's several points. One, iron is strong. Clay is brittle. They don't fit together, do they? Absolutely not. They do not mix. So we get that. The question is, what does the text mean about lack of cohesion between the iron and the clay, especially when it starts talking about mixing with one another in marriage or commingling with the seed of man? What is going on with that? It's kind of interesting language. If we accept the fact that this dream is revelation from Yahweh, okay, it's direct revelation from God to a Gentile king. It really is. This blows a lot of Jews' minds in 500 BC. God's talking to a Gentile? Yes, he is, directly. And he has revealed this to Daniel to be able to communicate it to us. We've accepted the fact that this is a supernatural event. It is. Much of the Bible is filled with supernatural events that many times we try to explain in a natural perspective. We can't do it because God steps in and he says, this is the way it's going to be. It's going to be a little different this time. And that's what happened here. There is another way, though, of looking at this event that blends the ideas that run throughout the scriptures, not just here in Daniel, but go all the way back to Genesis and show up all the way in Revelation. And it's another way of looking at what's going on here. And I think it probably has more involved to it, and I see more opportunity with this particular interpretation than with the others that I've looked at. Verse 42 and 43 again. This is from the Septuagint. And as for the toes of the feet, a certain portion was iron, and a certain portion was of potter's clay. And a certain part of the kingdom will be strong, and a certain portion will be broken. And as you saw the iron mixed up together with the clay of an earthen vessel, they will be commingled into the offspring of mankind, and they will not be commingled in harmony, nor will they be favorably inclined toward one another. Who is they? Okay? Even as the iron is not able to be mixed with the clay of an earthen vessel. But you see that there, they will be favorably, they will not be commingled. They will not be commingled into the offspring of mankind. They will not be commingled in harmony. They will be will not be favorably inclined towards one another. They. Who's they? The mixing of the iron and the clay represents an attempt to bind two and distinct separate materials into one combined whole. And it can't happen because they won't go together. This is a picture being provided to us of something else that's a reality. Go home and try and put some clay together with some iron and see if it'll stick. It won't. It just won't. And notice it says it's broken. Well, what do you mean it's broken? What's going on with this? Okay, let me remind you of what it says in the book of Matthew when Jesus is talking to his disciples after he's walked over from the temple and he's looking at the temple. And they ask him several questions. And he tells them in Matthew 24, the coming of the Son of Man will be just like the days of Noah. Okay, what were the days of Noah like? In Luke 17, verses 26 to 30, Jesus said this as well. Just as it happened in the days of Noah, same conversation, this is just more information, so it will also be in the days of the Son of Man. They were eating, they were drinking, they were marrying, they were being given in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark. And the flood came and destroyed them all. It was the same as happened in the days of Lot. They were eating, they were drinking, they were buying, they were selling, they were planting, they were building. But on the day that Lot went out from Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. It will be just the same on the day that the Son of Man is revealed. There's like 35 different sermons that can be taught from that one thing. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to focus in on a couple of different things. Now, going back to the scripture that we saw in the Septuagint where it says the word mingle, okay? The word mingle is in Aramaic mitarvin. I'm probably destroying it. And when you start tearing it apart in terms of its language, it's considered a third-person plural hitpal, which is identical to the Hebrew hitpael. It's a type of language, like a verb or a noun or whatever. It's the same thing. The usage, though, of this is reflexive, and it means that the subject is also the object. So I dress myself, for example, would be one. I, the subject, do the action, I dress, okay? I also receive the action, I'm being dressed. So this is the same kind of word, commingle. So it's that type of word. They are also doing the mingling is what we're talking about. We don't know who they are, but they are when it talks about commingling, it's the same they, using that information out of the language. The verb in Daniel 2:43 conveys that meaning. They are the ones doing the action, but they are doing the action to themselves. Thus, the idea is that they, the subject, will mingle themselves with something else. Now, it really gets interesting when you start looking at it that way. Has anything like that ever happened in the past? Yes, it has. Just who or what are mingling with the seed of men? It would seem to refer that there are some beings that these kings are not wholly human, and they're trying to mingle themselves with people who are human. Could this be a hint of the return of what took place in Genesis 6? Are the Nephilim back? Now remember, the Nephilim were here during the days of Noah. It's going to be like the days of Noah, okay? So could that be the case? When you think about what that's saying in those words, what does that do in terms of you have 10 world powers that are being ruled by supernaturally empowered individuals who are not holy man, nor holy divine. They're this thing in between. They're Nephilim.
Today's message was in the book of Daniel, an Old Testament prophecy book. Pastor Ken has been teaching about some great things from this book here on the Unsaved Bible. Imagine living most of your adult life in a foreign land. This was what God had for Daniel, but the way God used him was powerful. In the land of Babylon, Daniel witnessed many kingdoms come and go, rise to power and fall to others. But under several kings, Daniel found favor because he honored God along the way. Wouldn't you love to be known for honoring God all of your life? It wasn't an easy road for Daniel to take, but when he was faced with each trial or opposition, he put God as number one, and God blessed him and gave him high esteem. If you want to hear more about Daniel's life and journey through these things, you can listen to additional teachings at theunsafebible.com. While you're there, feel free to get a better understanding of what we believe and what our core foundation is built on by going to the About tab at theunsafebible.com. Do you live in the Jupiter, Florida area? If so, you're welcome to join us for these kinds of messages in person. You'll notice ways to contact us on our website, so you can find out when and where we meet each week. Go to theunsafebible.com and look for the Connect tab. We're so glad you took the time today to hear from God's Word. Pastor Ken has more to share with you from the book of Daniel, so don't miss a single edition. Continue growing on your own, and then come back for more on the Unsafe Bible.